So, as you can see from the two loops, there's the old system and then there's the emergent system. So we'll go through the old system first. So within the old system, as the old system was rising, there were stabilizers who, yeah, truly believed in the merits of this system that was building and have firmly entrenched themselves in this system. So these are people, organizations, institutions that have worked most of their lives or have put most of their what's this time energy investment in keeping this old system flourishing. Yet, as we see what's happening now within this old system, is there is a decline that's rapidly happening. And this decline is also about how the world is shifting, the worldviews and the environment is shifting. And this decline eventually puts us in a place where there are things that we need to let go of, that we really need to compose and to die in that sense. So one of the things that you would be noticing, there's the hospice work that's indicated here that as the old system begins to die or decline, hospicing is very important, which is the caring for the dying. How are we able to help the stabilizers or those who are deeply entrenched in the old system to transition to the new system? And that is through the hospice work. That is through giving space, providing compassion, allowing for conversations, and allowing to have a feel and taste of what the resistance of the stabilizers are and where they're coming from. And then as that as the old system is declining, alongside it are people who are walking out of that system, people who are fighting themselves, ready to break out and say, okay, I know there's something else that we can offer. So these are the walkouts from the old system. It might also be stabilizers from the old system that now have seen that there are things that they can do differently and couldn't do it within the current system. So these walkouts, as you can see here, there's four different areas that are very crucial. And one is to name who's walking out, who are the pioneers, the change makers, the innovators, those who are thinking and doing things differently. And as we name them, it's important for us to connect who the walkouts are and build the networks necessary to be able to really see who's in the field with us, who's working and or doing what. And for the new system, for the emergent system to really rise, we need to nourish these connections. And we can nourish these connections by forming communities of practice, ways in which we are now able to name the new practices, identify these new practices, and be able to share them also with others. And as we do that, as you can see, there's now the rising of the emergent system that's happening. We need to illuminate, the system of influence, the best practices, this new language, new practices that we want to see in society so that we can bridge again people from the old system and bring them towards the new system. So in a nutshell, those are the dynamics that are happening within Two Loops model. And as you also see, there's the hospice work that needs to be there, but there's also the birthing of the new system that's also happened, which we would also be talking about.
So I'm going to stop the share just for a moment so that we can have a bit more of a conversation about that. I guess when I look at this model, I maybe see three big roles to be performed. One is the hospicing of what's dying. One is composting what's dying, and so that it's not that we're throwing everything out as we move from one system to another, but that we're using the kind of the material, the disintegrating material of one system to become the fresh soil for the new system. And then the third is about building and nourishing the new system in that kind of that way of networking and connecting and illuminating that you were talking about. So I don't know if we just want to spend a little bit of time just talking about those kind of in turn before we move to the breakout groups. So in terms of hospicing, when we were preparing for this conversation, we were thinking about what would be examples of this. And you had a very interesting example that you came up with about applying compassion to what's dying.
So again, if we really look at the essence of what hospicing means, it's really making the dying process be graceful and holding space for it. One of the things that I'm noticing is in our haste to move out of the system, we also then forget to think about that this old system was built and sustained and have flourished because of people, organizations, institutions. And they are deeply entrenched in those positions as a stabilizer. So compassion is very important for us to be able to really bring in this. Where is the resistance coming from? And how can we bring as many people into to the emergent system? So for me, compassion is that, it is that quality of connection that allows for us to give space for others. Yeah. And not just to those that are walking out, but those who are staying. Because it's so easy to say the cancel culture that we're seeing nowadays. And it's so easy to say, oh, I don't believe in that. I'm not going to do it. And then that's it. But it's more rewarding if we can sit in tension and sit in conversations that allow for us to hear each other and to know where people are at in these change processes that are going, and how can we meet them where they are. And I find compassion as a way to do that.
Thank you. I was thinking about this in relation to death more generally. So I've had the privilege of, and I see it as a privilege, of being present at the death of my eldest brother 10 years ago now, and my father 3 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was thinking about my brother's death, and something that really helped was he was in hospital, and there were some nurses who would just fuss around, and they would be really almost overly caring towards us, how sorry they were. But also when we asked what was going to happen, and if they had any sense of the time frame, they couldn't tell us. And then all of a sudden, this nurse walked in, and I remember her name. It was Darcy. I remember this because of Darcy Bustle. She was called Darcy, and she just knew death inside out. And she came in, and we said, "Oh, nobody can tell us, but they're saying it's going to be days." And she looked at my brother, and she had a walk around the body, and she said, "No, it's going to be hours." She said, "This is it." She said, and you will know, it will start at his feet will go cold, and it will move up his body, and then his breath will change, the pace of his breath will change, and then you will hear the death rattle, and that will be it. And there was something so reassuring about somebody who knew how to hospice and could give us information that was useful to prepare us for what was coming, rather than to pretend that it was all going to be all right, or that it wasn't happening, it was going to happen later. So I don't know. So I don't know if in any way that means anything in relation to systemic change for you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing such a powerful memory and powerful experience. I do think that it's such a big privilege for us to be present to someone who's in their last, hours of life. And and this is what's happening right now, like we know there's something that's happening within the planet, within, society, and that there's really a collapse that we can feel. It's so palpable within the different infrastructures that we're part of. And yet oftentimes we don't even talk about it. We don't get into conversations around it. And this is also what drew me to this courageous conversation, because for me, I'm like, oh, let's talk about the life stuff. And this is life of how do we essentially give space,
Mm.
knowing that there is collapse that's happening, knowing that there is death that's inevitable for all of us, for every one of us. And having those conversations is one, having someone to support you in that period is also another one. And this is also why that me having someone that can guide people in this transition is very important. And finding yourself as that guide can be very challenging, because it puts you in a space of conflict in values and in practice, that you'd want to get people to change or to move to a new system. Yet we need to also acknowledge that each one moves in different phases, in different stages. And how do we address to that? How do we address that tension of not everyone moves in the same pace as you do?
Yeah. So, moving on to the next bit, which is composting. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on this, because
This is your area, Chris.
yeah, the people who know that I live on an organic farm, communal farm, and I was recently, we had a BBC television crew here looking at what we were doing, and the presenter, who was a children's television presenter, and so he's quite a jokey guy. He christened me the king of compost. So I have never lived this title down since. But yeah, composting as a metaphor, as a practice, actual composting is my thing. But as a metaphor, what I discovered about composting is that there's basically two ways to do it. There's a cold composting or there's a hot composting. Cold composting, you basically cut down anything that's dying, anything that's borne fruit that you need to take out of the ground to make space for something else to come in. And you just lay it down on a heap, and you cover it over and you leave it for a year, maybe 2 years, and it just decomposes itself, and then you can use it. Hot composting systems, you basically take the same material, but you shred it. So you put it through something that cuts it up really fine. You make sure you've got the right mix of different components. You probably add some manure, and then it cooks. It reaches heat and it cooks itself, and you turn it a bit, and it decomposes much faster that way. And actually, it produces much richer soil because it's full of life. It's full of the manure that you've put in just explodes into microbes. And so it's a much richer output. And I've been wondering what on earth that might mean for what we're doing in this stage, those two different methods. I don't know if you if you have any reflection on that, or
Well,
maybe somebody later will have a reflection. I don't.
when you shared this, Chris, in our previous conversation, the first thing that really came to mind was, oh, within government systems, we're in that code composting, you know? Let's just dump things and then let's wait for it to, what's this, to decompose. And then you have initiatives from people because they want to accelerate that. They want to get to the good bits faster. So that hot composing is something that for me was like, oh, it resonates with people who knew that this is inevitable and would want to harvest as much of the good stuff as
Mm.
as much as possible. And this is also why it in this space of composting, it would be great for us to think of what are the ways that this old system has benefited us, you know, what are the strengths or the assets of the old system, and to really fine tune that of what has it helped us, you know, what did it accomplish for us, and to give that space as a space of gratitude, as a space of acknowledging that without this old system, we will never be here in the first place. And in as much as there needs to be change, it's that acknowledgement of we've we've benefited, we've what's this? We are functioning and we have created things because of the old system. So how can we bring the value of that into the new system, the emergent system that we're trying to create? So it's not a total, oh, the old system is bad and I don't want anything to do with it, and then that's it. But more of the composting part is really harvesting. What's the beauty? What are the gems that we can take?
And if I may, I find that an incredibly generous perspective from somebody from a country that has been colonized by a system that is not indigenous, and that there's no doubt caused a lot of pain and destruction in the process.
And,
So,
and this has been in conversations that I'm part of as well. So like when we get into thinking, okay, how can we get into regenerative states? One of the things that we need to acknowledge is also who are in this space with us, talking about regeneration in the first place. And I wouldn't be here if it was not for my ancestors who've made decisions for me to be here. And this is that part of looking at an old system also from that point of view of, oh, our ancestors did the best that they could at that given time. And it's the same way that I'm doing the best that I could at this given time, at this given moment. So my choices and how I live up to my choices are based also from that, of that acknowledgement of whatever it was in my past and within my ancestry is something that I'm carrying as well, and holding to heart. So thank you for sharing about how you see that from a colonial point of view. It's definitely one juicy topic that I also love to getting into.
yeah. All right, so let's. Sorry, I'll just say something quickly about that, because half of my family is American, and they were British and then German and Norwegian pioneers. So they were pioneer colonialists. So I feel like in some ways it's my responsibility to name that where I see it. Yeah. So thank you. So let's quickly do the birthing part of this before we break out into breakout rooms then. So you were talking about this process of birthing the new system, and then there were roles in there about of naming what's new and connecting what's new. And is there anything more just to say about that and how you see that, and or what might be useful things for us to be doing in that process at the moment?
I love that Mary has already added this in her what's this in her chat reply, the word healing. Yeah, that the restoration bit. For me, it's what I'm seeing that, and probably you've noticed it too with the pandemic and how things have started. So we know that we can't go on with the old ways of doing things given the pandemic, and we've different societies, different governments have instituted different restrictions, different ways to see how we can navigate through COVID. And what I'm seeing is crucial is how can we also restore the parts where the resistance is coming from and the new ways of being that are emerging. So how can we create restorative practices that will allow us to be in a space of abundance or fullness as we create the emergent states, rather than coming in from a space of fear or anger, or resentment, which personally, this is what I'm also seeing within the climate situation, that there's a lot of anger and resentment that's happening with the youth. And how can we help them process that anger so that the new system that they're bringing up and in fostering in the world is coming from a space of fullness rather than their rage alone? So there's the for me, healing is very important in this birthing process of as we birth this new system. How can it be coming from a space of fullness?
Thank you. Thank you. It reminds me of the traditional mode of healing that was common in the British Isles before the medieval times, where the village healer was usually a woman, a wise woman, was the birth attendant and also the attendant at death, and she was the healer for throughout life. That kind of, so all three of these roles were held by wise women traditionally in these parts.